Start. Welcome to the District 15 Town Hall. I'm Kathy Durkowski, the chair of the District 15 Democratic Caucus. Lisa Edwards is the vice chair, Larry Arch is the treasurer, and Ginger McComber is the secretary. The D15 Democratic Caucus is made up of our D15 precinct officials, our MCDCC representatives who reside in D15 and our elected Democratic state representatives. Our D15 district stretches from Potomac to Poolesville and includes 33 precincts. The purpose of tonight's town hall is to allow our D15 legislators to share their 2025 legislative accomplishments and to answer your questions about the 2025 legislative session. Tonight's town moderator is Larry Arch, our District 15 treasurer. We will be ending shortly around 8:30, or actually no later than 8:30. Besides the questions that were submitted beforehand, we will be taking questions from the chat. Go ahead, Larry.
Well, welcome to Senator Brian Feldman, delegates Linda Foley, David Fraser Hidalgo, and Lily Chi. I'm supposed to acknowledge the elected representatives, but I can't see anybody. So Andrew, if you could, you've already mentioned two. Do we have any others in the audience?
In addition to Councilmember Balcom and Sheriff we have one of our Board of Elections members, Margie DeLeo, who lives here in District 15. And
Okay.
David Naiman, who is the president of the Board of Elections as well.
Okay, thank you. We're going to be, like Kathy said, this is a webinar. If you have questions, use the Q&A tab for your questions. We're not going to have live questions tonight. Each legislator will have an opportunity to introduce themselves with an opening statement, including a brief summary of the 2025 legislative accomplishments. Then I will ask each of the legislators questions that were submitted beforehand, after which I will ask questions that have been submitted in the chat, and then the legislators will each have an opportunity for a closing statement. So Brian, I understand you are going to be beginning. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Larry, and thank you, Kathy, and the D15 caucus for, again, organizing this annual ritual. We always do a pre-session and a post-session preview and then recap. And so this session was like no other. I would say, I don't want to speak for everybody, but it was maybe the toughest session most of us have encountered in our time there. And I'll just lead with that. We had yet again about 2,500 to 3,000 bills. I'll talk a little bit about my own committee, but I do chair one of the 4 standing committees in the Senate, the Education, Energy, and Environment Committee, which had more bills than any other committee in the General Assembly. It has jurisdiction not just over education, K through 12 higher ed, but also energy policy, which was a hot issue this year, environmental policy. But on top of that, data centers, cybersecurity, affordable housing, election law, and a lot more. And so I'll talk a little bit about that, but let me just do kind of maybe big picture has been, again, a tradition, starting with the budget. Well, actually, before we start with the budget, let me just talk about a great team we have here. A lot of the my committee that I just mentioned, a lot of it have a lot of overlap with the committees that delegates Chi, Foley, and Fraser Hidalgo serve on. So, like for example, energy policy, which was a really big issue this session in my committee in the General Assembly. David and Lily both serve on the House Economic Matters Committee, which also deals on the in the House of Delegates with energy policy. Similarly, we deal with environmental policy, and Delegate Foley serves on the Environment and Transportation Committee, chaired by Montgomery County's own Mark Corman. So we had overlap on a bunch of other issues there. And so I bring that up just to make the point that all 3 of my colleagues in the House are doing a fantastic job, and I'll let them talk a little bit about their own experience this session. But I do want to make one point. Although we had a very difficult budget situation when it came to the operating budget, the team here managed to secure more capital money back for District 15 than maybe we've ever gotten before. And so the capital budget is something separate. And I'll just kind of reel off. And it was all over the district. It was mentioned earlier, we represent a district that goes from Potomac all the way to Poolesville, to half of Germantown, Clarksburg, and everybody got some, we were able to secure money for projects ranging from Black Rock and Germantown to Ivy Mountain, Potomac, the Captain Thomas School, a lot of projects again in the Poolesville area. We got and Dave Fraser Doggo's been point guy. We got money to try to help us reopen the White's Ferry that's been closed for almost 4 years. We got money for Shady Grove Hospital. So I'll just make the point that we got more money this year in capital dollars than we did even a year ago. So with that said, back to the budget. So a huge overhang this session had to do with what's happening in Washington, D.C. And so let me just say that we walked in with a structural budget deficit, but that within literally 2 or 3 weeks, the $3 billion deficit ballooned to 3.3 million. Why? Because of federal layoffs. We had to do a revision within literally 2 weeks of the session started. And I'll come back to that in a second. But the issues in DC are profound. I'll make this point. We all know that we are very vulnerable. We have a huge federal workforce, about 150,000 federal workers. We have about 60 federal agencies. We have federal contractors all over the place, more per capita, I think, than most states. We have a lot of research institutions. We have NIH right in the middle of Montgomery County. Who gets more NIH grant money that's been on the chopping block than any institution in the United States of America, more than MIT, Stanford, Johns Hopkins University, right in the state of Maryland? And so when you put it all together, Moody's about 3 weeks ago, one of the rating agencies, and again, we have a AAA bond rating, Maryland. We're in only 14 states. We've managed our finances in a pretty responsible way over time, 14 states, and we are one of them. But Moody's said that of all 50 states in the United States of America, the most vulnerable state in the nation right now is Maryland because of everything I just talked about, all the chaos happening in DC. And so we had to take some action here. And by the way, I mentioned the federal layoffs at the front end. And then even in the last few weeks, we had our Maryland State Department of Education was thrown a curveball. They were expended $300 or $400 million in federal pandemic relief money that they were supposed to get. And the Trump administration, out of nowhere, about 2 weeks ago, pulled the plug and is refusing to reimburse our Maryland State Department of Education at the tune of about $300 million, another unforeseen hole that we're going to have to deal with. So this week you'll saw a lawsuit was filed, Maryland along with 15 states against the Trump administration on that front. There's Medicaid. Right now, we were one of the states that during Obamacare that took advantage of the fact that new Medicaid recipients, in order to expand Medicaid in Maryland, the federal government under Obamacare would pick up 90% of the tab, with the state only picking up 10% of the tab. A tremendous deal. Most states took advantage of it. Well, now they're talking about that split being 50-50. If that happens, that's another $1 billion hit to the state of Maryland. And so, you know, I put that all out there to say that one of the things in the budget that we did was we put about $2 billion away in a rainy day fund to protect against future action at the federal level or a future recession, et cetera. We also asked our budget folks to come up with a report that says if our revenues come reduced by $1 billion, give us a plan so that if we have to have a special session later in the year, we have a plan to work with. So again, a lot of what we did here this session was we did what we had to do to balance our budget, which is what we're required to do under our Constitution. We can talk about that during the Q&A, but we also have to protect against the future and what's happening in DC. One final note on the budget, Montgomery County actually fared pretty good in the scheme of things. We actually got about 6 or 7% more money in direct state aid than we did a year ago. So the delegation managed to bring home the bacon, if you will, on the capital side. And even on the operating side, we did a pretty good job on that front. For my own committee, and I don't know how much time I have left, the big issue for the committee that I serve on this session had to do with energy policy. And again, there's overlap with the committee that Lily and Dave serve on. We have a big problem in the state of Maryland. We do not produce enough energy. And so about 40% of the energy we currently use in Maryland, we have to import from out of state. And that causes a lot of problems. Ultimately, it means more transmission lines coming into this state. It has the supply-demand imbalance, has upward pressure on ratepayers. And so we took a pretty broad approach and a package set of bills to basically try to have more in-state generation. And that, I think, was a big focus of 3 different bills. And we can talk about some of the particulars. A lot of the bills, as they came in, there was opposition. And one of the bills had the environmental community opposed. By the end of session, the final product, the environmental community was neutral. Same thing with the bill that I put in with Chair C.T. Wilson. At the front end, the Maryland Association of Counties was opposed. At the end, they withdrew their opposition. So a lot of the bills in the energy space started one way, but at the end of the day, working with stakeholders, we were able to come up with a balanced package of bills, and we can talk a little bit more about the specifics. Also, the blueprint, the big education investment package, one of the biggest investments of K through 12 education we've ever had in the history of our state. We, for the most part, funded it, but in certain areas we have delayed implementation, and we have some triggers in place. And by the way, that comes to my committee as well. We had responsibility over all the policy issues. So we slowed down some things like collaborative time. We have a teacher shortage in the state of Maryland, and there were certain aspects of the blueprint for Maryland that we had to slow down for fiscal reasons and some practical reasons, meaning we have a shortage of teachers, and some of the aspects of the blueprint had to again be slowed down. Now, fiscally, it is a big investment in K through 12 education in the out years. So we have some triggers. One specific trigger says that if our revenues fall by 3.75%, some of the fiscal investment in K through 12 education through the blueprint were going to be delayed. So we put some triggers in place on that piece of legislation. More locally, we had an environmental policy. This is one that Delegate Foley was involved with, the so-called Building Energy Performance Standard legislation, which came through my committee. One problem there, this was a big issue for Montgomery County because Montgomery County is alone in the state. They have their own BEPS law, which happens to be in conflict with the state law. And it was important that we make create some exemptions to have the full impact of that piece of legislation has basically been delayed, to do a lot more studying on the cost of all that. But more importantly, we grandfathered in the Montgomery County law that's in place so that a building or a business that's in Montgomery is not in conflict complying with Montgomery law, but out of compliance with state law, and that really made no sense. So we were able to correct a lot of that in piece of legislation. And also we took care of some of our businesses that we want to protect and help grow, whether it's the life sciences, AstraZeneca on this BEPS bill was very involved. Hospitals who were subject to the BEPS laws are now getting exemptions. So we did a lot there. I mean, and I'll turn it to my colleagues. There were some things that we didn't pass. Maybe we can talk about a bill that I had with Dave Fraser-Hidalgo, which was, I thought, important for economic growth purposes. We were a bill that Delegate Foley sponsored, dealing with special elections, came through my committee. The Senate passed it. It stalled for the second year, having to do with filling legislative vacancies. That's one we can talk a little bit about. The governor had a big affordable housing bill, which on day 90, my committee was unable to, we ran out of time on that. And so there was, a number of bills that we ran out of time on, but overall it was a very contentious session, largely around the budget. But that said, I think we were able to do a lot of good things on energy policy, on some other issues amongst the 2,500 to 3,000 bills that we handled. And so that with that, Larry, I look forward to the Q&A where we really can get into some more details. And so, Larry, I'll yield back to you. You can select one of my colleagues to take it from here. Okay.
David, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I think that Senator Feldman does a great job of kind of recapping the whole session. So I'll try to focus on a couple of pieces that I worked on specifically, or that I think that didn't get covered. So first of all, thank you, Larry, Andrew, Kathy, the whole District 15 caucus. Again, I'll reiterate what Senator Feldman said. Our team works really, really well together. That's not the case in a lot of districts around the state. That's the truth. With that said, this session, I would say in my 12 years was probably by far the most challenging session, and I think my colleagues would probably agree with me. And I think Senator Feldman, although here significantly longer than I've been here, I think would be hard to dissuade him of that pronouncement. Look, we had a $3.25 billion budget shortfall. That is no small. That is no small fill. It was a lot of work coming up with cuts. There's a lot of work coming up with revenue raises. The governor's original budget kind of pretty much disproportionately hit Montgomery County pretty hard. But the team rallied together with other delegates from some of the other districts in Montgomery County to try to hold the line and push some of those back, which I think we did a good job on, really protecting Montgomery County. As Senator Feldman said, we did get more resources back this year. In many ways, and we did end up in some ways paying, average wise as far as wealth is concerned, we paid a little bit more than other counties did, but I think we really limited. We can go into detail about the estate tax, or we can go into detail about the IT tax, or we can go into detail about a lot of these things, but there's a lot to cover. So I'll go to a couple things that I think are kind of important. One was one of the bills that Senator Feldman focused on, that was his bill, which I have to applaud him because, from an energy perspective, we have to generate a lot more electricity in the state. We just do, for some of the reasons that Senator Feldman said, and more. And we have to really kind of turn our energy policy around. So one of the bills that we all worked on really, really hard was the solar siting bill, as well as some data center work, and as well as almost like a bill of rights for ratepayers, protecting them, pushing back on the utilities. And again, whoever wants to go into questions, we can go into questions on all those, but I think we came up with creative solutions. And on the big one on the solar setting perspective, or the solar setting bill, I think it's important to really to stress that going into session, the agricultural reserve in Montgomery County had no protections whatsoever. I think it's very important for everybody to understand that state law preempts county law. So I know that there was a lot of work done on the county side, and I applaud all the work that's been done over the years in the ZTA to protect the ag reserve. But when we go to Annapolis, and our colleagues and the people that, like the speaker and the Senate president, as well as just overall energy policy pulls and pushes, it's very hard to explain how Montgomery County has its ag reserve and other folks don't have their ag reserve, or do have their ag reserve, and how Montgomery County should be carved out and treated separately. In the end, we all worked very, very hard, and the ag reserve did very, very well. For the first time since the inception of the ag reserve in 1980, 95% of the agricultural reserve in Montgomery County, and different agricultural reserves around the state, but I'm going to specifically focus on Montgomery County, is protected in Maryland state law. That has never, ever been the case. So I know that there's been a lot of work done on the county level. The state preempts county law. So at the end of the day, coming out of this session, going into this session, the agricultural reserve had no protections whatsoever. We could put solar anywhere in the ag reserve that the state or the PSC and the CPCN process dictated needed to go. And now 95% of the agricultural reserve is protected, which I think is a huge, huge win. And I'm happy to talk about that in more detail, should anyone like to. Also, I know that there was a question there about White's Ferry. As you all know, many of the people on this call know, White's Ferry has been closed for over 4 years. The county and the state, particularly the county and the Department of Transportation, the leadership in the county, has been working really, really hard with the parties involved, which, as everyone knows, are 2 private parties in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We have had many, many meetings with them. We have had many, many offers with them. We have been negotiating with them for years and years and years. And after the last round, we secured from the state $1.5 million in order to make an offer. And the county did as well, for a total of $3 million for those 2 parties. And quite frankly, working with the commissioners from Poolesville, as well as working with the folks in the Department of Transportation at the state level, and particularly the county level, that worked really, really hard. Chris Conklin and his folks worked really hard on it. We just got to the point where the folks in Virginia just didn't really seem to be serious. They were just dragging the community along, making demand after demand, making promise after promise after promise, and then reneging on all those promises, ignoring no matter what we came back with their demands. When we met them, they had more demands and more demands. And so working with the town of Poolesville and all involved kind of came to the conclusion, we're not going to be spinning our wheels on this anymore. We have a total of $3 million dedicated to reopening the ferry. Those two parties can figure that out as best they can, and we need to get it opened if it's not opened by July 1 of next year. In other words, if they don't come to a signed ironclad deal with the county and the state of Maryland by July of next year, then we are no longer going to pursue negotiations. And the reason we've done that is because negotiations with them has proved to be a big waste of time for everybody involved, and extraordinarily frustrating. How those two parties, which are worth millions and millions and millions of dollars, can't seem to find a way to open that ferry is beyond me, and I think everybody's just frustrated with it. That's about it. I mean, I don't really want to go too much into my bills. I had one big bill, the Renew Act, which passed through Senator Feldman's committee. Thank you, Senator Feldman, for that. Some adjustments were made, but I think it sets up a really, really good framework for us to do some data, get some data and do some research in conjunction with the Comptroller's Office to figure out what the burning of fossil fuel by the fossil fuel industry has done and what it's really cost the state of Maryland in its totality, which is why the Comptroller's Office is leading the study. And we'll come back in a couple of years to figure out what that number is, and then hopefully sue the fossil fuel industry or charge the fossil fuel industry for the damage. Because in the budget shortfall, the way that we have it now, there's no reason why Maryland ratepayers, Maryland taxpayers, citizens of Maryland should be paying for the profits of the fossil fuel industry. So that's what that's about. And last but not least, Senator Feldman didn't mention it. We can talk more about it, but I suspect we'll be back in September or October for a special session as the Trump administration continues to eviscerate the state of Maryland, our tax base, our income base, our sales tax rates, everything that gets associated with all those. You know, we're bracing for the loss of 29,000 federal jobs, and what that means to our budget is going to be pretty tragic. So we'll probably be back. And with that, I will kick it back to you, Larry. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, David. Lily, how about your thoughts?
Hey, thank you, Larry. I'll try to keep it succinct. Besides thanking my District 15 team and Kathy and the D15 caucus, I want to give a shout out to my staff for a very stressful session, and thank the community for taking the time, driving all the way to Annapolis to engage us, to advocate on a myriad of issues that really made a big difference, whether it was energy policies or budget issues. So thank you. I'll try to focus only on the points that I have not heard mentioned much, in addition to talking about a few of the bills that I introduced in the past. So on the budget front, you already heard from Delegate Fraser-Hidalgo and Senator Feldman about what we had to do. But in addition to that, you know, we all received a lot of emails from our constituents and others questioning how we got into this budget hole, right? And then you saw social media, you know, former Governor Larry Hogan was not kind to the current governor in questioning how we got into this, sort of fueled this kind of frustration from the community and said, look, I left behind, you know, $5 billion surplus. How the hell did we get into a $3 billion budget hole? So let me just kind of break it down a little bit, to be fair, okay? That surplus was largely due to one-time pandemic funding that we just cannot count on, okay? And also the inflation, as we all know, the rapid speed of inflation means it just costs more to run a government and to keep the promises that you already made, to pay for things and to fund the capital projects, right? Due to global supply chains and all those kind of challenges. And so does the filling important vacancies to provide the kind of services that people want us to provide services on, you know. On top of that, let me be very candid. Maryland's sluggish economy also is a big factor that we are not seeing the kind of revenue growth that we should be seeing if we are more cognizant about growing our economy, which is why I'm so passionate about that. Hopefully we don't see another tax or fee increase in anytime soon because we're growing our economy. And on top of that, as the senator mentioned on top of the clock, you know, this drastic and massive and seemingly indiscriminate federal cuts of budget and jobs forces us to also be very conservative in our analysis and a projection of the revenue. So all of these factors combined means we have a $3.3 billion budget deficit. But I have to emphasize, out of these 3 billion that we have to close the budget out, 2 billion is across the board spending cuts. We did best to not hurt the education community, the students and most vulnerable, like a Medicaid and the disability communities, to protect them from further cuts. But we did have to cut across the board a whole lot already. So this is a responsible budget that we're looking at. I'm not going to spend much time talking about the energy bills, but I just want to say, just like the senator mentioned, Delegate David Fujaragu and I serve on Economic Matters Committee, so we were very much part of these discussions. And I just want to thank all the advocates for your understanding and advocacy, including Councilmember Marilyn Balcom, who also came to Annapolis and engaged us and advocated. And this is an ongoing conversation. These are huge omnibus bills that we will come back and make course correction if necessary and all of that. I want to highlight a couple of other things we did, which is our healthcare front. We have made permanent a program to subsidize the young adults in their participation in Obamacare, which is important, and also empowered the Prescription Drug Affordability Board to also engage in negotiations with the private pharmaceutical companies, not just for government purchases. And of course, we passed the Protecting Federal Workers Act, which is very timely, to establish a loan fund and to establish an expedited hiring program. On the social justice front, or criminal justice front, let me clarify that. Maryland has always been a leader, but I'm proud that we passed several bills this session. For example, the Maryland Second Look Act would allow people who were sentenced initially between the ages of 18 and 24 to have a chance to petition the court for a second look if they have served at least 20 years and are not considered dangerous criminals or sexual predators or someone who has been sentenced to life without parole. It's not second chance, it's second look. Just in case they are wrongly incarcerated or have any reasons to be reduced in their sentences. We also passed the Maryland Values Act, which is super timely given an increasingly aggressive federal government in cracking down immigrants, legal or illegal. And so libraries, sensitive locations like hospitals, libraries, churches, and schools will be off limits to the federal raids unless they have valid warrant to enter those locations. And on a somewhat more personal note, one of my constituents for the past couple of years pushed us to change a law so that cases like his grandchildren's would never happen again. And I'm very proud that this family law child custody determination law passed this year, which would expand the factors allowed to be considered in considering which parent should be awarded child custody. So advocacy does work, and we encourage you to do that. For myself, I introduced over a dozen bills this session, and 4 of them crossed the finish line and reached the governor's desk, including the Maryland Limited Worker Co-op bill, which is to recognize officially a category of businesses that is growing in our community, which is called the Worker Co-op. The other one is, and I want to thank Lynn Cowie from in partnering with me in pushing for the Montgomery County Agricultural Reserve Economic Study Bill, which also passed, that would require the Department of Commerce to take a deeper look at our economic opportunities. And of course, that's in collaboration with my entire District 15 team. And the Maryland Small Business Innovation Research Matching Grant, we made adjustment to that to make it more applicable to more businesses. And also the Office of Social Equity bill that I introduced. The Senate version passed across the entire finish line, and it is to use a portion of the cannabis sales tax to channel it to local community-based organizations across 24 jurisdictions to help those communities that have been most affected by the war on drugs. I have to say that I'm very disappointed, deeply disappointed, that several of my bills that I worked very hard on did not pass, including one that would have allowed the smaller employers to offer the same kind of health benefits as larger employers, so that more small employers and businesses would have the incentive to offer health insurance to their employees. It had a fabulous hearing and had this tremendous support of the business community, but it did not move in HGO. And another bill of mine did not move in Ways and Means that would have empowered the local counties to use development authorities and to expanded the use of tax increment financing to be more proactive in placemaking, affordable housing development, mixed use development kind of things. It wouldn't cost the state anything, and I don't know why we did not pass, but I'm still in negotiation with certain parties. It missed it by a hair. I have several other bills that I introduced related to consumer protection, high risk AI, for example, and electric distribution system planning, which somewhat has been integrated into one of the big energy bills. So it was a lot of hard work done by all of us to advance community interests in the long and short term. One of the things I want to point out is, as chair of business regulation, I had to push out several bills this session, one of which was a hard choice, which was the delay of the Maryland Paid Family and Medical Leave Program. We all worked harder to pass the program, and it's sad that we have to pull back a little bit because some of the business partners are now going under, including one of the federal partners that had been working with the Department of Labor is now being dissolved. So we want to buy ourselves a little bit time to do it right. So 18-month delay is what we settled on. Okay, so I'm going to stop here and look forward to your questions. Thank you very much, Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Lily. Linda Foley, last but not least.
Thank you. It's always difficult to follow this team and be at the end because they covered everything I wanted to cover. But I do want to thank Lily and Dave for their leadership on the Economic Matters Committee, and then especially Brian Feldman, Senator Feldman, for his leadership, not only as our senator, but also as chair of the EEE committee, as we call it in the Senate, and working out this energy package. And they've all touched on it, but I think it is a really, really important, there's some really important legislation that we passed with respect to energy. And I think it will really help ratepayers in Maryland, and also will hopefully move us in the direction of trying to solve some of the energy problems that we have. And it was a tremendous, tremendous amount of work. These are very complicated issues, and I want to thank them all for their work on that. Very important for Marylanders. I want to say just a couple words about the budget that haven't been said. One is that we got a lot of pushback when the budget was initially released by the governor, when the governor's budget was initially presented, about the cuts to developmentally disabled community and programs. And I'm happy to say that in addition to what Delegate Fraser Hidalgo said about pushing back on some of the impact that the revenue enhancements and taxes would have had on Montgomery County, we also pushed back really hard on the cuts to the disability community, and we're able to get those restored in the budget. I think that's really important, as well as maintaining a $10 million investment to make Maryland the capital of quantum computing. And we also preserved $1 million for the rape crisis centers, which was also on the chopping block. So there were some things that we were able to do by moving around some numbers in the budget to make sure that some of those important programs were maintained. Senator Feldman talked about the building energy performance standards. That is a bill that I spent a lot of time on in environment and transportation. And I worked really hard to get in amendments to make sure that Montgomery County's rules were siloed so that our folks in Montgomery County were not disadvantaged by trying to figure out which group of rules to follow. I think that bill needs more work. Some of the waivers that were in that bill did not end up getting passed, and we may have to come back and revisit some of that in terms of implementing the building energy performance standards, but it is a really good start, as Senator Feldman pointed out. A couple of other things before I get to my bills. One of them is we did do a few things around tenants' rights in my committee, which deals with housing. One that I think is really important is we did pass a bill that requires a landlord to provide a tenant with written notice at least 24 hours in advance when the landlord intends to enter a leased premises. This, to me, is a safety factor. And I think that's a really important bill that we passed. We also passed a really important bill related to mold. And making sure that if there is a mold problem in a rental property, that tenants have some rights. The bill carves out exceptions if the mold is caused by the tenant, but if the mold, most of the time, the mold isn't caused by the tenant. And when there are problems, this bill gets the landlord to be responsible for fixing them, as well as doing regular mold assessments on rental properties. I want to mention one bill in motor vehicles, the reckless, negligent, and aggressive driving bill that was passed. This was, you may remember, Sergeant Patrick Kep, who was hit on I-270 by a driver who was fleeing the scene. He lost both of his legs. He's back on the job, by the way, I'm happy to say. And this bill was sponsored by Delegate Greg Wims, and it alters the penalties and points assessments related to reckless, negligent, and aggressive driving, and raises the maximum financial penalties because they were really quite out of whack. So that's a really good bill. Delegate Chi mentioned the Protect Our Federal Workers Act, I believe, that, as she said, that offers financial assistance to federal workers, as well as allocating funds for the Attorney General's office to file challenges to actions by the Trump administration that violate the law. And then Delegate Chi also mentioned the Maryland Values Act, which restricts ICE from coming into certain sensitive areas like churches and schools without a federal warrant. So those are some of the things. I had two bills that passed that I sponsored. I sponsored many more, but like a lot of folks, I didn't get my bills passed this year because we were so consumed with these big issues. One that I do want to mention is I worked with Marilyn Balcom's office to pass a law regarding common ownership communities like homeowners associations, condominium associations, that prohibit them from requiring sensitive information such as birth certificate, social security card, or any document revealing immigration status as a condition for access to common or recreational areas in those communities. This actually happened in Clarksburg, and Maryland's office brought it to our attention, and I worked with Councilwoman Balcom's office on getting that legislation passed. So I'm really happy that that passed. I also passed a towing bill like I do every year, related to notification of cars being towed. And then my other bills got stalled. And as Senator Feldman mentioned, I had some hopes for the special elections bill to fill legislative vacancies, but it got bottled up in the Ways and Means Committee and ultimately did not come out of there. As he mentioned, it passed in the Senate. But I did get some more positive feedback on the bill from leadership in the House than I had gotten in the past. So I'm still hopeful that we can get that bill passed in my lifetime, hopefully next session. It is a constitutional amendment. It would have to go on the ballot, and voters would have to weigh in. I think that's really all I have to say, except to say again, as Delegate Chi said, I want to thank the District 15 caucus. I want to thank this team. As we all have said, we have a really great team. We do work together really well. And Lily thanked her staff. I thank my staff as well, but I thank the staff of all of the team, because we all work together, and the staff works really well together too. And I think we do provide very effective representation for the folks in District 15 because of that. So thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions going forward.
Hey, Larry,
Yes.
before we get to Q&A, can I make two quick points on the budget that haven't been mentioned? I think would be important.
Absolutely.
First of all, we talk about constitutional amendments. So in 2020, in November, we changed the Maryland State Constitution. Prior to that, the General Assembly had very little input in terms of being able to shift monies around. I think Dave talked about pushing back on the governor. Prior to the constitutional amendment, which gave the legislative branch much more ability in terms of budgetary flexibility, if you will. Prior to that, we had the strongest gubernatorial system in the United States of America. The governor presents a budget, and all we could do was cut. We couldn't shift. Now we can shift. And this was, I think, the first year where that new constitutional authority and power in the legislative branch really came to a place where it really made a big difference. And then the second point before we go to Q&A is, for all the talk about revenue and taxes, I just want to make this point on income taxes. 94% of Marylanders under this proposal, 94% will see either no increase or a tax reduction on their income tax liability side. So 94%. So I just put that out there for the audience's consumption. And so with that, Larry, I'll yield to you, and we'll open up for some Q&A.
Well, let's go to the questions which were submitted in advance. And the first couple of them, couple people have touched on, but let's see what else is out there. It's what bills didn't make it through that you hope to see passed next year and next session, and what was your biggest disappointment? If anybody wants to talk about something that has not already been addressed.
Well, maybe I'll take the lead. There's actually 3 bills. Each of my 3 colleagues here, 2 of which I was the cross-file. So I'll come back to Dave. Came up. We had a really important bill on terms of economic growth, where we have a lot of small companies here in Maryland, small early stage tech companies who are losing money, and they have net operating losses, or they have R&D tax credits they can't even use. And this bill borrowed from New Jersey a program where you can transfer your tax benefits to a big company, can then actually use those tax benefits for cash. Because these companies, the early stage companies, need the cash, whether it's 84 cents on the dollar, et cetera. And I thought that was really important piece of legislation. We definitely need to bring that back. And Lily mentioned, because I was the Senate cross-file of the bill dealing with healthcare and letting small businesses have some of the same benefits as larger businesses. I thought I had a good hearing in the Senate side. That was, I thought, one I'd love to see come back next session. And then finally, to Linda, it's really way past time for us to pass a special election bill for legislative vacancies. That was my committee. And I really thought it passed literally unanimously out of my committee, unanimously for the second year in a row on the Senate floor. There was no debate. And yet, for reasons I can't understand, it stalled in the House of Delegates. Those are 3 bills that my 3 colleagues introduced, 2 of which I was the sponsor on the Senate side, 1 of which came through my committee. So those are 3 that stand out for me personally.
The next question was the flip side of that. Is there anything that you were particularly pleased about, maybe surprisingly pleased about, that came out of this session?
I was
It was a tough session.
it was a very tough
Really
session. I guess do no harm, right? So I was personally happy we were able to push back on some of the things in the budget, as Delegate Frazier-Hidalgo said, particularly with respect to the estate tax and the inheritance tax scheme that was in the original budget for revenue enhancement. I think would have really redounded pretty hard on people in District 15. So there were things like that I was pleased about. And I also was pretty pleased that we were able to get some clarity on those building energy performance standards for Montgomery County. I think, that was really important, because that was causing a lot of angst here in the county in some of our communities. So I would say those are 2 things that I'm somewhat happy about, but it was a really tough session. There was a lot. I was happy to be home after it was over. That's what I was happy about. Able to make it.
I was worried at one point that those huge energy bills probably would not move at the end because of so many rounds of negotiations and amendments here and there. And I was really worried, but I'm glad we pushed it through, and treated them as priorities, because in-state energy production, especially cleaner energy production, is really what's called for. So I'm glad we had that kind of leadership to push it through.
Well,
I
I'll
would,
just,
I would
can
add,
I just
Larry,
echo that, having spent 2 hours on the floor of the Senate defending those very bills, I ditto what Lily Chi just said. Anyway, Dave, sorry.
no, I mean, I would add that I think you heard all of us talk about bills that we lost. I mean, I lost a lot of bills also. Linda lost a lot of bills. Lily lost, we all lost bills. And I would say, I don't want to comment on my colleagues' bills, you know, the complexities of why they were lost, but I will tell you that some of my bills, I did not have enough time to work as much because we were working on these other really massive pieces, the 3 energy bills that Lily was talking about. I mean, Lily and I literally sit next to each other on the committee, and we were going through line by line on a couple of these bills, making sure that you know, our charge for our district is to hold the line on a couple of these pieces, and that required a lot of political capital. I will tell you, on ECM, Lily and I really spent a lot of political capital this session, and that came with a price. When you keep asking for things, then some of the other things that you want, you can't go ask for them. You can only go back to leadership a few times to ask for things that are important for you. So if you have, you know, 4 or 5 bills or 3 or 4 bills that you want to get out of your committee, you can ask for those 3 or 4 bills, and you can push really hard and you get 3 or 4 out. Maybe, you know, out of 5, maybe you get 3 or 4 out. But if you're pushing on other bills that aren't your bills, but are super, super important to your county or to your district, then you can't ask for 3 or 4 bills anymore. Now you're just asking for 1 or 2 bills that you're pushing your political capital for. So I think that I will say, you know, a significant number of my bills didn't go very far either. And a lot of that's because, you know, we were expending political time and political resources and capital on these really big pieces, particularly, and I think Linda mentioned it, is the budget piece. Like, the original way the budget came out balanced the budget. Almost 40% of those increases came out of Montgomery County and out of districts 15 and 16. So how do we, you know, push back on that? And that was some of those meetings that we were in on the House side and that Brian was in on the Senate side. Those asks, they came with a price, which is okay. Well, all right, you just can't keep coming back. So those pushbacks really helped the district a lot, but you know, that's just the way it works, right? There's only so much you can ask for. There's only so much candy in the machine.
Well, in a tough session, I would say the fact that you were able to get some of that stuff changed was really a success.
And Larry, I would
for-
add, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you,
Go
Larry.
ahead, no, ahead.
I would add that I talked to some of the folks like lobbyists that have been down there for 30 years or more. And several of them had told me they had not seen a session that was this challenging since the early 90s.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The next couple of questions I think you've already touched on, and this one was partially touched on, but what legislation was enacted to bring jobs to Maryland, and what legislation was enacted to grow our Maryland economy?
Yeah, actually, a lot of them. Maybe we can, after the session, make a list. I can tell you a couple of my bills, just in my short history in the legislature, were enacted that are meant to grow different industries, including the Industry 4.0 manufacturing job that was passed a couple years ago, and Governor Moore put in $6 million on top of the couple $1 million that my bill would add. I think after the budget bill finally passed that they took away a couple millions, but it's still, you know, good start, a big boost in morale for the manufacturing community. The other one is the small business, SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research, which would disproportionately benefit counties like Montgomery and Baltimore, where there's a lot of innovation, early stage innovation businesses. In advancing their ideas, in helping them commercialize their ideas to market. So these have been enacted and funded. This session, I am pleased that the BioHub Maryland program, they got the $500,000 that they asked for. It is in our district in Rockville, a relatively new workforce development program to, you know, channel workforce talent pool to biomanufacturing industry. And also, the governor committed the millions of dollars to boost our quantum computing leadership in the country, where Maryland is already leading the country through University of Maryland and other industry players, but he's very gung-ho about committing to that.
I think that's pretty impressive. Does anybody else have anything they want to add?
There's about 130 or 140 million dollars in the budget that passed specifically towards economic development. I am, disappointed on a couple of the bills I just, I mentioned, whether it was Dave's and mine. I mean, early on in my career, I passed the biotechnology investment tax credit. These are programs that require dollars, though. And although I appreciate the 130 or 140 million dollars in some of the bills that Lily just mentioned, I think this is the key. We've clearly come to the realization that dependence on the federal government is not the keys to the kingdom moving forward for our state. And we do need, this is not a new issue, but it's really an exclamation point this year. We need to grow our private sector economy. And, 130, 140 million dollars here and there, I think we need to think a little bigger, but in order to think bigger, you need resources. And so I think that's the challenge right now is I think there is ideas that require a lot of, more money than we have available discretionary wise to really jumpstart. And we have a branding problem. I mean, I'll be honest, this morning I got an email from a local biotech company that merged with a larger company. I'm not going to name the company, but they said that they're going to probably locate the merged company in Pittsburgh, which happens to be my hometown and Linda Foley's hometown. But I don't want companies like biotech companies going to Pittsburgh. They need to stay here. And in that same text to me this morning, he complained about Montgomery County business climate not being good enough. And so, I will say the elections are next year. I mean, at the county level, we'll have a new county executive. I mean, these are really, really important. When we talk about branding at the state level, but also here in Montgomery County, whoever the next county executive is that's a really important decision for the voters of Montgomery County. And, and I know we've got some county council folks. I think Marilyn Balcom got a shout out. I thought maybe Don Lukey maybe on the call, but these are good folks, but we also need a good county executive and we're going to have a new one. So I just put that out there for some discussion, maybe at a next meeting at some point.
Okay, well, I thank you. I think those are good points, and it's very important. Yeah, it's really important to work on our economy. Next question is, which state taxes are increasing for next year and which are decreasing?
Well, I said earlier, 94% on the income tax side, which is what most people understand, is 94% of Marylanders will see either no increase or a decrease. The folks who are going to get hit are the people that we have. There are 2 additional brackets for upper income folks. At $500,000, you'll be subject to instead of the current 5.75%, you're going to it's going to get bumped up to 6.25%. And if you make over $1 million a year, you'll go to 6.5%. So those are the categories of Marylanders who are probably going to see the lion's share, certainly on the income tax side, and even some other things it's very much skewed towards the folks in those categories that'll pay a certain surcharge on capital gains. And things yeah, so I think that's where things came down. Now, again, the original bill that the governor put in got rid of itemized deductions entirely. Now, this new proposal, it phases out over, a little later. I mean, there are a lot of little things that really were different than the bill that came in. The standard deduction actually gets increased by 20%. But the bottom line is, if you're making over $500,000, if you're at 750,000 or more, around 750, you'll be paying about $1,500 more in income tax. But for the other 94%, on the income tax side, not going to be a big hit. And Dave, we mentioned the state taxes was left alone. I think on balance, again, we were heavy on cuts, not as much on revenue. There are some fees like vehicle fees, purchase of a tire, these kinds of things. A lot of that money, by the way, is going to our transportation trust fund to the tune of $500 million, which we sorely need. Our transportation infrastructure in the state needs money, and a lot of those fees are directed towards those kinds of projects and that part of the equation. But so I don't know. Anybody else want to weigh in that?
I would the only thing that I would add a couple of pieces in that is that a lot of those smaller kind of fees you'll see like when you buy a new car, the excise tax went up a little bit. You see little bits here and there. But I will say the pushback that we had for like the estate tax, that's, you know, where it's 5 million and they wanted to make it 2 million. And so I know that we went into leadership and we said, you know, I remember I had a quote, which was, do you know, they're building brand new houses in Poolsville. Poolsville. We're not talking about Bethesda or Chevy Chase or Potomac, Rockville. We're talking about Poolsville. They're starting at about $1 million. So when you think about what that means from an estate perspective, going from 5 million to 2 million might not be a really, really big deal in certain parts of the state. But in our district, that is a really, really big deal. And we got heard from by a lot of folks that, you know, by the time you retire and or you want your estate to go, when you pass away, that 2 million might not that might be like your house and a couple of things. So things like that. We did also do a tax, which I wasn't a really big fan of, and I don't think anybody on this call, my colleagues, was a fan of. It was a technology tax, which is a 3% tax on tech. It's how I got involved in the General Assembly to begin with. That's one of my first meetings with Senator Brian Feldman, who was a delegate at the time. Back in 2007 and 8, the General Assembly passed the tech tax, and then it ended up getting reversed. But it comes up with $500 million, and $500 million goes a very long way. So I've got a feeling we're going to be seeing that again. But
yeah, can I just add also, we avoided, again, a lot of stuff. For example, there was in the governor's proposal, a fee on delivery of Amazon product, right? Like 75. Okay, that got rid of. We got, I mean, there's a lot that we kind of avoided. A tax on professional services, like your CPAs and others. Okay, that was in the original bill. Very broad-based tax on professional services. Ended up being reduced down to this piece of legislation that Dave talked about tech. That's modeled, by the way, after Texas. Texas has this law already in place, so it's not necessarily a red state, blue state kind of thing. But the reality is, as a result of how we kind of change things up, a lot of the stuff that would impact everybody, again, like an Amazon delivery or professional services, all these businesses, that got rid of in the negotiation, and so that always has to be brought up. It's not what passed, it's what didn't pass.
Yeah. One note of caution, though, just for Montgomery County residents, for residents of every county, we did pass in the bill, we pushed down some costs to the counties. And in exchange for that, we are allowing the counties to raise their rates, which, you know, you may see on a local level. I don't know what the county budget negotiations are going to be like. But we did allow the county to raise taxes if they want to, enabling legislation as part of the budget. So that could come and hit some people that were not impacted by the state budget, if in fact the county goes that route.
It's the piggyback tax, Larry. You know, it's right now capped at 3.2.
Right.
This allows counties, just enables, doesn't mean they have to go
That's
from
correct.
3.2 to 3.3.
Right.
That's basically what
Yeah.
Linda was referring to.
Yeah.
so
Yes.
Linda's point is that if people have a concern with that, you need to really fight it on the county level. Like, be aware, you're aware what the county does or doesn't do.
Yes. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. The next question has to do with data centers. Kind of a specific question. Could data centers be required to create new renewable energy projects at least equal to the electric power they will be taking from the grid, as well as the necessary battery storage as backup?
Yeah, well,
I mean, the general question is, you know, talk about data centers and what's happening with
well,
them.
data centers take up a tremendous amount of energy. They provide upside economic potential for our state. They are coming to Maryland. My committee has jurisdiction over it. So the debate we had this year had to do with if they're going to come and they're going to need a lot of power, how are they going to get it? Where are they going to get it? And who's going to pay for some of the corollary? So here's kind of, we actually did, there's a lot of things we did on data centers this session. First of all, we have a study, an economic impact study that's in a piece of legislation. I can even tell you I haven't committed some memories, SB 116. And it's going to look at, environmental impacts. It's going to look at, water consumption, potential economic benefits. But in one of the big energy bills, Senate Bill 937, we said, look, if you're going to come to Maryland, we're going to actually make sure that you have to pay your fair share of the costs associated with it, and so that it's not borne by Maryland ratepayers. And there's going to be a rate schedule developed by the Public Service Commission that will say, look, if you're going to have an Amazon data center, you're going to have to pay a rate, and that will be computed, and there'll be methodology. So that's one part of it. Also, where they're going to get their power, if they're going to try to feed off the grid, it's only going to work, and we're only going to allow them to do it under certain circumstances if the power there is an increase in power commensurate with the amount of power that they're going to consume. And so if you look at the Senate Bill 937, it's very detailed, but there's provisions in Senate Bill 937 and Senate Bill 116 that go right at the heart of this issue, dealing with data centers, energy consumption, and what are they going to pay, and who's going to pay, and what are some of the economic benefits. And so that really could be another hour or two. I will say I chair a national task force on this very issue for the National Conference State Legislature. I'm meeting in San Antonio in May. And so I'm the new national chair, and this is very much going to be the topic. This is not a uniquely Maryland subject. Okay, this is a national discussion in terms of data centers and power consumption and the grid and reliability and all those issues.
Senator Feldman, wasn't there a push to allow a data center right at Calvert Cliffs to suck the energy off the grid before it ever got to the grid?
Yeah, so
and that was prevented in your bill, I think.
Yeah, right. So I mean, and even last year, the Public Service Commission issued a ruling that made it almost impossible for data centers to come to Maryland, and the Governor Moore brought in a bill into my committee that overruled the Public Service Commission. It had to do with backup diesel generators and that kind of thing. And so this is an evolving subject. Loudoun County, Virginia is the data center capital. We have 60-70% of all the data centers on Earth is in one place, the Commonwealth of Virginia, right across the Potomac River from Poolesville. Okay, so it's right there. There's lessons learned from Virginia, but now you've got 3 Mile Island is opening to basically provide power to a Microsoft data center. And so this tandem of nuclear power plants teaming up with a data center, again, this is a national conversation. And I think this is one that's going to, over the next few years, be one of the hot topics in the state of Maryland.
So Brian, the next question was on Senate Bill 116, which you addressed. The other bill you talked about, did that pass?
Yes, that's one of the 3 leadership package of bills, one of the big bills, Senate Bill 937, and I don't recall, the House bill I think is 1035. Believe it, I have these numbers memorized because we spent so much time on it. So that was a President Ferguson, Speaker Jones bill, and Senate Bill 937, House Bill 1035, and that has a lot of what I just said in that bill. And Senate Bill 116 is a bunch of studies by the Maryland Department of Environment, the Public Service Commission, Commerce Department, all that kind of stuff.
And Larry,
Yes.
I think it's important to mention that while Senator Feldman said that he rattled off all those bill numbers and he knows what those bill numbers are because he worked so hard on them, I would also tell you that he knows what they are because of the trauma that was involved in working on those bills. I mean, those were monstrous bills, and Senator Feldman did it in just an incredible amount of stress and pressure to try to get as many parties happy as possible while passing meaningful legislation that protects the ratepayer, the taxpayer, while at the same time, generating electricity and balancing. I cannot stress to everybody on this call enough how much pressure was on Senator Feldman. He's the chair of EEE. He's the chair of Education, the Environment, and Energy. He's the chair. So all of this came down on his shoulders really, really hard.
Although a lot of the stress came from that House committee, House Economic Matters Committee, pushing back. So we got 2 chambers here, and so I can think what I want, but I got this Fraser Hidalgo Chi C.T. Wilson committee on the other side it's hard. A lot of stress, but
I'm innocent.
Yeah. Poor Brian's what I'm saying. It was tough. It was tough.
Okay, the next question switches gears again. How is the funding for Metro resolved? What are the key
Metro,
transportation
yeah.
funding levels in the adopted budget?
Yeah, Metro, a few years ago, Senator Feldman might have been involved in this too. I know that Delegate Corman was involved. A few years ago, the General Assembly adopted regular funding for Metro so that we don't come back every year. We have regularly budgeted funding for Metro, and that's how it was resolved this year. It just rather than fight over it every year, we now just automatically do it. And then if there needs to be more money, we put more money. But I don't believe we put more money this year. I think we just went with the stipend that we have. Yeah.
Okay, so just to correct the record a little bit, so in 2018-19, Delegate Corman and I did pass a piece of legislation along this. Metro involves a compact, so we can't do anything unless Virginia and DC agree to do exactly what the agreement calls for. So in 2018-19, for the first time since 1967, we actually, the three jurisdictions came together and we passed a dedicated funding stream for Metro. And it was, Maryland's share was $167 million. And it worked fantastically for the last 5-6 years in terms of just predictability, 167. Okay, well, now we have Governor Youngkin in Virginia. Things have shifted a little bit. So there was a bill this year. It was Delegate Corman and Senator Augustine, who used to be on the Metro Board of Directors, were the sponsors, to take that 167 million up to 225 million dedicated, because Metro, when we get to 2029, they're going to fall off kind of a debt cliff. And so they've been able to clear the queue and do a lot of capital stuff with the bill from 2018, but they came to the General Assembly this year with this piece of legislation to try to bump that to 225. And that bill, again, a casualty of the fiscal situation, could not get out of the Senate. Actually, I think it passed out of the House of Delegates, but we came up short on the Senate side. So that's unfortunate because how important that is to the region. It was good what we did again in 2018-19. And then the other part of it, it's contingent. Even if we would have passed it in the Senate, it was contingent upon Virginia and DC signing off on their increased share. And that's not going to happen with Governor Youngkin and the current makeup of the Commonwealth of Virginia legislature. There's not a lot of love for Northern Virginia. We see that with White's Ferry, and we see it with Metro. When we did it in 18-19, it was Governor Northam. That was a different ball game. So we came up short on the Metro funding thing this session.
Thank you. This next question is more of a political question and not so much a legislative question. How are you leading local efforts to organize so that we can make a difference?
I think, there's a lot going on in this region. I'll just say that. And, we've tried in the legislature. You heard we passed some legislation to try to push back on what's going on at the federal level. I think that's where our efforts are. And, there certainly are a lot of opportunities for us to jump in and protest and push back as citizens. But I think our role is more appropriate to try to preserve what we have for Marylanders, making sure, for example, as Senator Feldman said, that, our Medicaid benefits are protected, making sure that our people are protected, and we don't have a lot of situations like what happened to Mr. Garcia. We passed some legislation to try to prevent that, to try to support our federal workers. I would just say that, speaking for myself, that if people have questions or they are concerned about things that are going on at the federal level, I see my role as a legislator as trying to help people who are impacted by those actions, putting them in touch with resources to help them get through whatever trauma they have. I think that's in my role as a legislator. I speaking for myself, I think that's really what I intend to do to try to help Marylanders get through this really bad situation we have.
I think Linda did a great job.
Yep, ditto.
We gotta know our place.
I
Thanks for the
associate
federal side.
myself with Delegate Foley's comments.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, I'll read it. I'm really worried that disability benefits were cut so severely, especially LIS funding, and I'm not sure what that is. It really feels as if the disability community is being abandoned. Looking forward, what are your plans to invest in this community that has been historically underserved? Now, I know you mentioned
They weren't
earlier
cuts. The cuts didn't go through.
the cuts
That's
didn't
not
go
accurate.
through,
Yeah.
so that's the answer to the question. The
Yeah,
cuts
there
didn't
was a
go through.
proposed I think it was over $200 million worth of cuts, and the legislature reversed that.
We
And
restored.
kudos
much
to
of
the
funding.
disability community, because as Delegate She said, as a community, they really showed up in Annapolis and really made a difference. If there was ever a reason to say advocacy in Annapolis matters, the disability community proved it this year. They were there constantly, both going to individual legislators and demonstrating on the mall and going to leadership, and it paid off because the funding cuts were restored.
Thank you. The next question also is a little general. How does the state measure effects of climate change mitigation efforts?
I mean, I will say that the bill that I've worked on for years got passed this year, came through ECM and EEE, which will help measure the economic damage done to the state of Maryland by the fossil fuel industry, and that report will be due out in a couple of years. So I don't know, and then we'll go from there. But the bill originally, as it was, authorized about $1 billion a year of fees to the fossil fuel industry for a total of $9 billion. But now that we're doing a study that is being done by the Comptroller's Office and as well as the other agencies, I wouldn't be surprised if that number objectively is much greater than $9 billion.
That bill that Delegate Frazier-Hidalgo sponsored, the Renew Act, is a really important, I think, piece of legislation when it comes to measuring climate, the effects of climate change, and to also try to mitigate the effects of climate change. So kudos to him for pushing that bill. The Maryland Department of the Environment does do a study every year to assess where we are with respect to our climate goals. So that is available. There are a number of different places where they measure climate mitigation. There isn't like one size fits all, because there are all kinds of different things that are going on. And there are all kinds of different aspects of it. But MDE does issue a report every year about where we are with respect to our climate goals and how much progress we're making or not making.
I'm on the Climate Change Commission, the Senate representative, and they do an annual report that's actually it's a good read. If you go deep in the budget this year, there's about $100 million in climate pollution reduction monies devoted to that subject. I will make this point. There was an analysis done of Maryland specifically, looking back from 2006, I believe, to now. And actually, we are probably one of the better performing states in the nation in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emission levels from 2006 to the current year. If you were to Google it, you'd see a report to sort of corroborate what I just said. So we're doing our part, but again, the national climate is shifting. And so we've, back to energy policy, we've talked a lot about, I was a sponsor of the Clean Energy Jobs Act in 2019. And the reality is some of the incentives for solar and offshore wind, et cetera, are going to be going away during this next 3 or 4 year period. And so we have to deal with the real world as it exists now in terms of producing energy, understanding that the headwinds when it comes to some of our renewable energy sources is going to be a tougher lift, harder to pencil out these projects and that type of thing. But that said, I think we've done a better job than most states on that front.
Next question relates to White Ferry. I think David gave us a pretty good summary on that, including his frustration level. The next is for Lily. And would Lily please talk about the impact on the Asian community who are so affected by the tariffs, both in their personal lives and their business?
Oh, wow. I didn't expect a question that weighty. Well, but we are all living it. No, there's no winner in this game, when both sides escalate. And now, if you thought this administration was only targeting China, which the previous administration was not a friend of either, right? Now, it's like they're targeting American companies as much as they're targeting foreign companies. Because so many American manufacturers depend on parts to produce, cars and phones, laptops, and you name it. So this is just a big hot mess, and I don't think it only impacts Asian communities necessarily as consumers and or businesses. However, I would say because of the fact that many in Asian communities know people who are in that world doing business or doing, some kind of international business on both sides, they probably, to some extent, will feel more strongly about this overall worsening of the climate. And I hope whatever it is, it's not going to become another terrible episode during the pandemic when people get personally targeted because of certain things. But it is a very unfortunate dynamic, and for quite a few years, and not just recently, I know it has been nearly impossible to move money out of China or into China for our biotech and innovation-driven companies that want to attract investment capital because they're friends, VCs, that have money, but the money is, prohibited from moving out of China by the Chinese government. And on the US side, the same thing happened. This kind of dynamic has been going on for a few years, but now with this escalating tariff, it's just a much broader and immediate hit for everybody. So anyone who is immediately caught in that kind of transactions or trade is going to have a much tougher time.
Hey,
Thank
Larry,
you,
on
Lily.
the
Oh,
tariff
go ahead,
issue,
Brian.
Larry, we didn't mention the tariff. You know who gets super big time hurt by the tariff is also the Port of Baltimore, one of our biggest economic engines, Port of Baltimore, and they're like they don't even know where to start about the economic damage to the port, and so I have to throw that into the mix when we use the word tariff at this point. That has implications at the port in a major way.
Was there any
Yeah,
activity in the session this year specifically dealing with the Port of Baltimore?
I don't think there was any specific legislation to my knowledge. No.
No, there
Right.
was no.
So
Some
that may be,
bridge
if
stuff
they're
from
really
last year.
hurt, something may be
I
coming
mean, we're
down
just
the
hoping
pipe.
we can get the feds to come clean and
Build
gotta
the bridge.
we got to get that bridge rebuilt. That's part
Yeah,
of the big issue.
that's true. Okay, the last question was very specific. The last question pre-submitted was very specific. Did a title lock provision, which is a service that monitors property titles for fraudulent transfers and notifies the homeowner, pass? If so, when does it take effect and how will it be implemented?
We need to look it up. I don't know which bill is that.
We had a bill
Oh,
in
I don't-
environment and transportation, which also deals with housing. That may be this. I don't know what specifically this title lock provision is, but
Yeah, I
there
didn't
was
either.
there was a bill about mortgages being transferred without the property owner's knowledge. It was a bill sponsored. It was HB 769. It passed the House, but it didn't pass the Senate. And sometimes those are called zombie mortgages. I don't know if that's what this was referring to, but I don't recall a specific provision about a title lock provision in a bill.
So I guess the answer to the question is no, it did not.
It didn't pass.
Well, that's one of the problems of having 3,000 bills in the legislature.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, we're not all well-versed in
We're
all.
almost at our time for wind up, but maybe we can squeeze in one that was submitted a little while ago in the Q&A. With Trump's freeze on Biden's infrastructure funding, how has Maryland been affected? Are projects being stopped midstream? How has the legislature reacted?
FBI,
Yep.
Yep.
elections have
That's
consequences.
a big one.
FBI is gone. The Senator Feldman mentioned earlier about the bridge. So last year, as everybody knows, a bridge collapsed. We have got to get the money to rebuild the bridge. So I will tell
Has
you
that,
that
is that been withdrawn or is that still on the books? I thought it was still on the books.
I think we got it. I think
We
we
got
got
it?
it already. Yeah.
Okay.
the one thing that I will say, which my chairman says, which I think is funny in a very demonic way, is that the one thing that Donald Trump is really, really good at, better than anybody I know, is not paying his bills. So I don't put anything, not even until the money hits the bank do I believe it's real. I only believe it's real after it hits the bank and whoever got that grant money from the feds spent it and it's gone. Then it's real.
Well, I mentioned earlier, Maryland State Department of Education is waiting for $300 million in reimbursement pandemic
Right.
money that was approved. They spent, and now they can't get it from the Fed. So even on the Delegate Foley is correct. The money was approved, but boy, until that cash is literally, in the hands of the folks who can, basically get it done, my confidence level in current administration, even then, is not what it should be. So.
Okay, so we have a hard stop at 8:30, so let's take a couple of minutes each to give a wind up. So who wants to go first? I'll let you guys decide.
Why don't we go in reverse order? I volunteer Delegate
Linda.
Foley, who leads off, and we'll go back the other way.
Okay. Well, I think, we've said a lot here, and I don't know that there's more to say. I did put in the chat, if you are interested in a deeper dive into the General Assembly, the 90-day report is now available. That's a very valuable document. It's 400 some pages long, but it's pretty easy to go through. It's free. It's on the MGA website, which is mgaledge.maryland.gov, I think.
Yeah, that's what you have.
Yeah, put it in the chat. And I do recommend that you take a look at that. And then beyond that, I just, again, want to thank the team members, particularly, it's great to have a great team when when things are moving along well and the session's going well. When the session's tough like this one, it's even more important to have a strong team to work with. And I'm thankful every day that we have that here in District 15. I'm also thankful every day for the District 15 caucus. You folks do so much, and we really appreciate all the effort that you put into making sure that the citizens and residents of our district are informed about what's going on, as well as making sure that we know what you're thinking out there. And finally, to the residents of District 15, it is really an honor to be a representative of you in the Maryland General Assembly. And please don't hesitate to reach out with any concerns or suggestions that you might have about how we can do things better during these very, very difficult times. And I do, before I give away, I do want to give a shout out to our senator who happens to hail from Montgomery County, our U.S. Senator, Senator Chris Van Hollen, who bravely traveled to El Salvador to try to get one of our residents, Mr. Garcia, out of a very notorious prison that the Trump administration illegally sent him to. And I just am very grateful that we have good representation in the House and Senate at the federal level as well. So thanks a lot. Thanks to you, Larry, for emceeing this so well. And hopefully better days are ahead.
Keep your fingers crossed. Lily?
Thank you, Larry. I think Delegate Foley summarized well. It was an exceptionally difficult session, but I came out proud. As Delegate Frazier-Hidalgo mentioned, we were all worried, and in various ways, each of us, Senator and all three of us delegates, found different ways to get word through the leadership about the budget, how it would disproportionately, what was proposed initially would disproportionately impact our district in Montgomery County, because we don't just represent our district, we represent the entire 1 million+ people county. And we're all deeply concerned about Maryland's overall well-being, right? Once you get to Annapolis, you work for the whole community. So I want to just express our gratitude for not only your strong advocacy and efforts, but your understanding of how tough a job that this could be. Most people don't know who their state representatives are, nor do they care. You are exceptional citizens who spend the time, not only advocated, but take the time to listen to us explain about things. So we just want to appreciate your partnership. We wouldn't be effective without you. And hopefully we can continue to monitor how things go at local level and use the interim to be engaged, in whatever ways is appropriate. So thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Shi. David?
Yeah, I mean, I think my colleagues pretty much said most of it. I'm in the same place now that Linda was in the beginning of this conversation. Look, usually during session, we have a sit down. The D15 team has a sit down to kind of talk about where we are and some of the key bills and what's going on. This session was so busy and so kind of crazy. We proposed dates, but we just couldn't have that sit down. Usually we try to sit down over breakfast and kind of toward the latter half of session, and we just couldn't get our schedules to do it. So, and I think what Delegate Foley said was true. It's easy to be a good team when everything is working great and we're bringing home, great wins. But it's a lot harder when it's very, very stressful. And so I think there's still a lot more stress coming, to be clear. And I thank the caucus for all of their work and all of their advocacy, like Delegate Shi said. But there's going to be more needed. We're going to depend on you even more in the future, the special session, and maybe for the next session or two until we can, get through a lot of this stuff, especially the Trump stuff. And also, Larry, I think it's important to mention the White's Ferry. I wasn't the only one frustrated. Everybody was frustrated. The decision to have a deadline on negotiations and then walk away no longer, that was done in close conjunction and work with the Poolesville Town Commissioners and the county and the state. Everybody kind of just had enough is enough. So it's important to understand that's a big joint decision that was made pretty much unanimously. I think everybody was just kind of done with trying to get those two to come to the table.
David, let me step out of role here a second. Are we getting any, after all of this, with all this money we're throwing at it, any cooperation from either the state of Virginia or the county?
The state of Virginia doesn't care. We have gone to Loudoun County, we've gone to the state, the Commonwealth. They do not care at all. They have permitting issues as well. They just do not care. This is really up to the owner of the ferry and the owner of the landing on the other side. And the two of them just cannot seem to get along. They cannot seem to put the community ahead of their own interests, and their own interests seem to be paramount to them. And to be clear, those parties have a significant amount of wealth already. And so to hold the community hostage the way that they are is extraordinarily frustrating for the town of Poolesville, for the state, and for the county that, Marilyn Balcom and Andrew Friedson, our county executive, the Department of Transportation, Chris Conklin, have been working really hard with both of those parties for 4 years. We haven't spent that $3 million yet. We just allocated it and said, look, we are willing as a community to bring $3 million to the table from the state and the county, 1.5 each, to try to make a deal. They know this. We've been talking to them about this for some time, and neither of them seem to really care. So I'm not holding back anymore, because holding back and trying to negotiate with them has done nothing for the town of Poolesville and Montgomery County and the state. Over 4 years, the two of them have acted like petulant children. And so I'm not holding back at all anymore. That's what they are. That's how they acted. They should be ashamed of the way they've acted.
Sorry for pulling you into this again.
But that's okay.
Senator
No, I want to be
Feldman,
clear, right?
you
Because
can
we
have
have
the last word.
because we have people like Link Howling and Jim Brown from Poolesville that have been equally so incredibly working so hard and so frustrated on this issue. And I think the value that they bring and the work that they've done for the town, as well as everybody else that I've mentioned, is incredibly important. How much work everybody's put into that.
Hey, Larry, do I get 30 seconds before we cut off, or it's too late? Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, an honor to serve with this group. Fantastic. We're only less than 3 months into the Trump administration. It's hard to believe. But when we get to September, keep an eye on September 1st, the Bureau of Revenue Estimates in Maryland will be meeting to give us the lowdown on the revenue picture. And if the revenue picture is what we think it is, we will have a special session at the end of September, early October, and all these things that we avoided and we're gloating about now will be back on the table potentially in October. So I think this story is to be continued until a little bit later in the year. So with that very encouraging news, I'm going to close it. Thank you, Larry, and thank you, Kathy. Thank you, the caucus, and thank you to the team, the best team in the entire General Assembly Legislative District.
So before we go, let me just real quick say thank you to the D15 legislators, our moderator, Larry Arch, and all who attended. If you want to get involved with the D15 caucus activities, contact me, Catherine Dierkowski at gmail.com, or fill out our volunteer form at our website, d15democrats.org. The MoCo Dems 5K Fall Fun Run is an October 11 event organized by the D15 Caucus for Adults and Youth to be held at the Agricultural History Farm Park in Durwood. The purpose of the event is to have an outdoor, fun, and healthy gathering to promote community engagement and voter participation in Montgomery County. Please consider becoming a sponsor or donating. The funds will be raised by this event will cover caucus costs for activities, events, and items to encourage voter participation. Register at bit.ly/MoCo 5K Fun Run. I put that in the chat. We hope to have Lieutenant Governor Aruna Miller as the keynote speaker. A special thank you to Senator Feldman for his generous sponsorship.
No, actually, can I correct that? That's a District 15 team sponsorship. I want to correct the record.
Okay. Thank you. And you can learn more about MCDCC activities at mcdcc.org/newsletter. And thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.